Chapter 43. Almost had him. And thanks to my betas, Darreldeem and Alex33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. Disclaimer. I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HP. A short narration. The hunting team was at a standstill. The only Horcrux left was the one in Harry's scar, they hoped. It didn't stop them from looking, though. They just weren't finding anything. The Potters and the other parents were still poring over the grimoires to find a spell to transfer Harry's to another object that the boy could carry. There were a few that they hoped they could tweak to be used. They were almost there. The Potter parents wanted it out of their son. The room of hidden things had been scoured for dark objects and potions. The treasures were donated to the Hogwarts funds, and all the books were given to the Hogwarts library. If there were many copies, the board decided to donate them to the Hogsmeade Library for the villagers to use. Items were sold to the shops in Hogsmeade and Diagon Alley, and the proceeds were put in the school funds. Things that couldn't be sold were given to the junk shop or donated to the poor. The Hogsmeade Library was a success. The computers were used by everyone, and the witches and wizards of the community were learning a lot. Plans were in the making for a larger facility in Diagon Alley, though the paperwork for that area was much more complex than what had been needed for Hogsmeade. The animagus crystals sold like hot cakes. The registered wizards and witches had bloomed from 5 to 25. Everyone knew there were unregistered magical folk, and some worried that the Death Eaters were among them. However, it was reasoned out that the pros outweighed the cons. Anything that gave the common folk an edge was considered a good thing. The mutineers were still trying to find their animals. They weren't that discouraged this type of magic was for those much older than them. Even the marauders couldn't do it until their 4th year. Some did come to the conclusion that they wouldn't be able to transform. Gary was getting his wish, in that he knew his animal was tiny. Harry's animal was too cloudy to know. January 10, 1994, Gary was quite worried about Hermione. She was studying all the time. Every time he saw her, she had a book in her hand, or she was helping the rest of her group with their homework. He never saw them studying on their own, only doing their homework at the last minute and causing their friend to stress out more, like it was up to her to make sure they got good grades. He was unhappy because these 4 students knew better. They had all been taught good study habits at his house after all. He worried that his mum's spell had wiped all the good they taught the ex-mutineers. He would have to ask her or Sally. He was in the common room after curfew and noted Hermione sitting on her own at a table surrounded by books. He made his way over, sat across from her, and pulled out his own runes homework. Silently, they worked for about a half an hour. Then the girl suddenly broke the silence and asked, "What do you want? What do you mean? I'm just doing my homework." Gary asked, his head tilted in confusion. "Nobody sits by me to do homework unless they want help," she stated with an exasperated sigh. "Then those people are stupid or lazy," he said firmly and bent over his S. "Don't talk about my friends like that," the bushy-haired girl snapped. "Friends, are you sure?" "Because friends don't use friends to do their homework," Gary snarled back, putting his quill down and glaring at her. "That's not all they do," Hermione said defensively. "Really, what else do they do with you? Because I've been watching, and the only time I see you guys together is when homework needs to be done or at meal times. They even let you wander alone on Hogsmeade weekends, which is very dangerous, considering there's a criminal on the loose," he stated firmly. "We just, well, We don't share a lot of common interest, that's all. I like books and studying. Ron and Seamus are sports fans, and Faye and Leanne are more into clothes than I am," she mumbled, looking down at the table. "Hermione, I've said it before, I like you. You're an interesting person. I think you can do better. I don't always share the same interests with my friends. However, we make sure we spend time together and discuss things we do have in common," Gary said softly as he lifted her chin gently and looked into her eyes. "I know what you're doing," he said, and when her eyes filled with shock and then worry, he added, "I'm not going to try and stop you, but I have to say that you're doing too much. If you were only working on your homework, then you might be okay, but you're doing the studies of 5 people. Hermione, not even adults would take on that much by themselves." "I can do it," she said defensively. She jerked her chin out of his fingers and started gathering up her papers and books. What business is it of yours anyway? You don't like it when I ask you questions. Why are you bothering me? I just don't like seeing people used. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'll be here, he offered as he watched her gather up her things. Besides, I'm not demanding answers from you. I'm simply telling you what I've noticed and offering my advice. Whether you take it or not is up to you. He shrugged and made sure to keep his voice even. Well, for future reference, don't. She shoved her things into the expandable book bag and stormed off. Gary sighed and went back to his homework, hopeful that he at least planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She was a smart girl, just a little ignorant about how friends acted. Maybe he could get Parvati and Lavender to work with her. February 12, 1994, Monday would be Valentine's Day, and it was a Hogsmeade weekend. The mutineers were all going to the village, and like last time, they were going down in a large group and then splitting up when they got there. Harry was going to shop with his usual study buddies, Daphne, Terry, Padma, and Mandy. Though the mutineers were still one big group, they tended to separate into like-minded groups. Gary was going with Dean, Susan, Hannah, Parvati, and Lavender. He got a lot of ribbing for hanging around mostly girls. Dean loved that he was surrounded by females. Hormones were a good thing. Breakfast was over, and the kids went to get their winter cloaks. Harry and Gary had yet to decide what to get the girls in the group for Valentine's Day. They didn't want to do what they had done last year, but there really weren't that many options for just friends. They did talk about getting their crushes something special and would be talking to their mum about it today. The twins let each group know they were going to the library to talk to their mum and that they could either come with or they would meet up with them later. Harry's group, being mostly Ravenclaws, went to the library. Gary's group, being mostly girls, went to Gladrags. Lily was manning Pandora's box for the cashier who was on an early lunch. The twins went to join her. Mum, we don't know what to get the girls this year. Any ideas for just friend gifts? Harry asked as he leaned against the wall behind the booth. Well, there are quite a few, actually. You can get a small stuffed animal or a picture frame. There are also pens or quills for the more studious ones, or some personalized stationery for letter writing. There are really lots of things to choose from. Aren't you putting this off a little late? It's not like we don't talk nightly, she asked with a quirk of her lips. It was fun to tease hormonal boys. Gary slumped at his mother's teasing and answered, We were hoping to come up with something ourselves, but everything we thought of could be taken the wrong way. We also wanted to ask what we could get Susan and Daphne. Nothing big, like a ring or anything, but something that lets them know we are still thinking about them. If you want to keep it simple, then a small locket or charm bracelet would be best, Lily suggested, reaching over and mussing up their hair. It was good to see the boys unwind a little. Now if they could only catch that rat, then everyone could relax more. The schedule that the parents were going through just to patrol this village was wearing on everyone's nerves. All the near misses weren't helping. I do suggest that you don't get matching gifts. The boys blushed at that. Sometimes it was hard to separate their thoughts. Both had been thinking about lockets for the two girls. You're right, thanks, Mum, Harry said, pushing himself off the wall and giving his mother a hug. I'm going to get the gang and we'll go shopping. He turned to Gary and asked, Teddy bears for our together friend gifts. You buy them and get them to the post office. Oh, wait, most of your group is girls. Maybe we should split off from our friends after lunch and shop together, he suggested, looking at his brother. That's actually a good idea, Gary said with a shrug. I'll let the gang know. How does around one sound? We can meet up at the Cheerful Duck and get the teddy bears. Maybe we can get them with T-shirts with Valentine wishes printed on them. Then we can go to Blue Stone Jewels and pick out something for the girlfriends. He mused, lost in thought. Harry whacked him upside his head and said, Those are actually good ideas, but let's wait until we get there. So I'll see you at 1. Okay, Harry. Thanks, Mum. Gary gave his mother a hug and left the library to look for his friends. Harry waved to his mum and went to find his group. They were in the computer room looking up Valentines for friends. He smacked his head and wondered why he didn't think of that. They spent a few more minutes cruising the sites and then decided to go shopping. It was an enjoyable afternoon, with much laughter and joking. At noon, all of the mutineers, and what seemed like the rest of the students, met up at the Three Broomsticks. It was quite crowded, but Madame Rosmutter was in her element, and everyone was served in due time. Harry and Gary split off from their groups and told them they would make their way back to the castle together. Not many were worried, with the parents patrolling. So the twins said their goodbyes and went to the toy shop. Inside were walls and walls of toys. Many were flying around above their heads, and some of the stuffed animals were moving or talking. The boys decided that they wouldn't get animated toys and stuck to their plan. They approached the cashier and told her what they wanted. She was more than happy to help them out. Magic was a wonderful thing because the one they chose was limited, but the clerk could copy it. The teddy bear they picked was a simple one. It was a light brown with a button nose and blue glass eyes. It bore a white t-shirt, and the phrases they chose for each girl were spelled on. All in all, it took about an hour to get every girl taken care of. They took their purchases to the post office and arranged for them to be delivered on Valentine's Day morning before the normal morning post. It cost them extra, but their friends were worth it. They went to the jewelry store and spent a half an hour choosing the gifts. Gary went for the charm bracelet, and Harry picked a nice locket. They paid for their purchases and left the store. I hope Susan likes this bracelet, Gary deliberated as he looked at the simple chain-linked bracelet that had a charm depicting a snitch. She will, Harry offered, not really paying attention as he was looking at the heart-shaped locket in his hand. They were walking past Zonko's when suddenly a hand grabbed Harry by the collar and dragged him into the alley. Gary dropped the bracelet and immediately followed, his wand out and a curse on his lips. When he got further into the alley, he heard a man mumbling, "Master will be so proud of me. I will bring him the boy who lived." "Let my brother go, you bastard," Gary yelled at the same time Harry was yelling. "Let me go, asshat." Harry struggled in the firm grip, kicking his feet backwards to hit the crazy man's shins and get away from him. "No, no, I must bring Gary Potter to my master," the skeletal man said frantically, never once loosening his grip. His prison robes hung off his bony frame. His grey-brown hair was long and matted. There was a desperate look in his eye, which made Gary very cautious. Azkaban had done this man no favors. He looked nothing like the pictures they had seen of him. Gone was the plump, shy man. Present was a crazy, hardened criminal whose only desire was to gain favor with his absent master. Pettigrew dragged Harry further into the alley. He whipped out a knife and pressed against the boy's neck. Harry stopped struggling. His eyes caught Gary's, and they started frantically communicating plans mentally. There was a noise at the mouth of the alley, and a bushy-haired girl entered with her wand drawn. "Harry, Gary, what can I do?" she said, staying at the entrance to the alley with a determined look in her eye. Knowing the girl had no training, Gary quickly glanced sideways at her and said, "Go and get my mum. She's in the library." He hoped Hermione would do as he asked. She was a liability if she stayed. "I can't leave you here," the girl said defiantly, a true Gryffindor. Gary had always been truthful with her, blunt and sometimes hurtful, but he never lied. She couldn't leave him and his brother to a madman. She firmed her shoulders and stood straighter. Her arm rose until it pointed at Pettigrew's head. Unfortunately, Harry was in the way of any clean shots. "Hermione, trust me. Go and get my mum," Gary said more firmly as he edged closer to Harry and Wormtail. Peter pressed the knife firmer into Harry's neck when he noted Gary's movements. He turned and made sure he had a human shield no matter whose wand was pointing at him. He ducked his head behind his captive and continued mumbling about how his master would be proud. Harry hissed at the pain, and Gary stopped moving when he saw a bead of blood run down his brother's neck. Hermione looked torn. Her eyes were darting around as she looked to see if there really was anything she could do. After about a minute, she decided to do what Gary said and ran from the alley. Gary let out a small sigh of relief, never taking his eyes off the scene in front of him. He observed a lot of garbage in the alley and quickly sent a message to Harry. There was a broken cauldron behind Wormtail, and he was going to try and knock him out. Harry had to be careful to move with the man so he didn't get badly cut. Harry inched his hand up to grab the arm with the knife to limit any damage. He was hopeful that an adult would get here soon and made a mental note to start studying healing spells. Gary levitated the broke cauldron up until it was right behind the desperate man, wandlessly and wordlessly, almost with his mind. The movements with his left hand were so small. He nodded his head minutely and slammed the pot onto Peter's head, which caused the man to jerk forward. Harry moved with the man and then grabbed the hand with the knife. He head-butted the man, holding him. Now Peter's head jerked back and his eyes rolled. Harry quickly got loose, his neck bleeding steadily, but the knife seemed to have missed the vein. The boys both shot an incarcerous spell at the rat, but just as the ropes were wrapping around him, he transformed and stumbled drunkenly behind the trash bins. The twins quickly started to levitate the bins away from the wall, but the rat wasn't there. They cast an Akio spell trying to bring the escaped prisoner to them, but it didn't work. Just then more noise came from the alley opening, and the twins whipped around, wands up, and saw it was the adults. They both let out a collective sigh and dropped their wands to their side. Lily saw her eldest son's pale face and the blood still streaming down his neck. She gave a cry of despair and practically apparated to her injured child. She quickly cast an episky to try and stop the bleeding. It took 4 passes, but the wound finally closed. She made the same mental note Harry had about learning better healing spells. "Oh, Merlin, are you boys all right?" Sirius asked breathlessly, not seeing Harry behind Lily. The parents had just noticed Peter and the twins on the map and had run to get him away from the boys. They passed a hysterical Hermione on the way, but they couldn't take the time to calm the girl. None of the parents had been on this side of the village. They had all been either escorting other students back to the castle or regrouping for the change of shift, which is why he was there. He was on the night shift. "No, Harry is not okay," Lily snapped, causing Padfoot to turn to her. Upon seeing the boy's robe drenched in blood, Sirius almost fainted. Instead, he went to Gary and started making sure there were no injuries on his godson and heir. "I'm okay, Padfoot. Just shaken and pissed off that we missed him again. Damn him and his rat form. We almost had him." Gary shouted the last sentence in frustration. Hermione was leaning against the wall of the alley trying to compose herself. She had been listening to Ron all this time, and he had been telling her that the twins were making up the danger they were supposed to be in. Now she knew that they really were being hunted. Maybe it was time she listened to others besides her friends. "We need to get Harry to the infirmary. He has lost a lot of blood," Lily said, gathering up her eldest, and started walking to the castle. "Sirius, use the mirror and tell Madame Pomfrey what has happened. Then call Flitwick so he knows too. Also call Savage. He should still be on duty, and tell him the rat got away." Again, she barked out orders and grabbed Gary as they passed by. Sirius, never one to defy an angry Lily, pulled out his mirror and did as she demanded. Harry snagged Hermione's robe as they walked past. He wasn't leaving her there alone. She resisted for a second and shook her head and followed along. He stopped at the street and picked up the jewelry they had dropped, noting that some cleansing charms would be in order. He tucked the items in his robe and followed his mum and Harry, still very worried about his brother. He kept Hermione close, not trusting that rat bastard to be gone. A few more adults joined the group as they quickly walked up the trail to the castle. They were met by the nurse, and she stopped them to cast diagnostic spells. Her lips firmed at the results. Nevertheless, she nodded reassuringly to Lily. Harry would be all right. Professor Flitwick ran as fast as his little legs allowed and met them at the gates. "Oh my, what happened?" he said, seeing his student's robes and pale face. Sirius had only told him that Harry was injured and on the way back. "Pettigrew," Lily snarled, still holding Harry tightly to her side. Gary and Hermione were trailing behind. The other adults fanned out, wands drawn. "Oh my," the diminutive professor repeated with a worried shake of his head. "Well, let's get him to the hospital wing. There is nothing Poppy can't cure. Rest your mind, Mrs. Potter." He patted the distraught woman's arm. 3 auras passed them on the way to the front doors. They stopped long enough to ask where they had last seen the convict and then ran to the village. Nobody was hopeful they would catch him, but glad to see the men doing their job. Dumbledore met them in the entrance hall and was looking at the hurt boy with concerned eyes, though you could see disappointment in them as well. He fell in step with them. "Poppy told me what happened before she left," he said, looking at the Mediwitch, then back to Harry. "I do hope your injuries are not serious, my boy." "No, sir. It wasn't a deep cut. It just bled a lot," Harry offered from his place in his mother's arms. He was leaning against her, his head woozy, and he couldn't stand up on his own. "That is good news indeed," the headmaster said, his eyes twinkling. Then he shook his head a little and said, "Though I must express my disappointment in you too. Had you not left your friends, this might not have happened. I once again offer my services for your training. Perhaps with time and proper instruction, you can prevent such occurrences." Now is not the time, Dumbledore. Lily snapped, not once stopping the trek to the infirmary. And don't you dare chastise my children. That is up to me, and James and I, for one, don't think they did anything wrong. She was actually quite proud of her sons. You are, of course, correct, my dear. Perhaps we can take up the discussing another time. Mr. Potter, I do hope you feel better soon, he offered, and then broke off from the group to reassess his plans. Harry had to stay the night in the hospital wing and take some blood-replenishing potion. He was fine the next day, but for the slight trauma of almost being kidnapped. Gary was more protective of his brother than ever. They kept their link open most of the time now. Valentine's Day went off without a hitch, and all the girls loved their gifts. Tension was tight, and defense training started to be more strenuous. However, no one wanted to be off guard again. Time skip Gary and Harry were never left alone, as schedules were formed within the mutineers to make sure they were escorted everywhere they went. They were denied access to Hogsmeade, and even though they were disappointed, they did understand. Hermione seemed to be less stressed as the months passed, and Gary only hoped that meant she had dropped some of her classes. She kept closer to the mutineers and even joined their study group occasionally. Her friends berated her about it, saying the mutineers were not the type of people she should be hanging around. They couldn't remember why, just that they didn't like them much. Without a concrete reason for such statements, Hermione defended her actions to them, but still helped her friends with their homework. Once again, the mutineers were at the top of their classes, and the study group was going strong. More and more students joined as the final exams came closer. They welcomed everyone. The headmaster only made one more attempt to offer extra studies for the twins. When asked if the other mutineers could get said studies also, he dropped the subject. Only glimpses of the rat were seen the rest of the year. The students started to relax, since he was never seen around the castle. That was until a chilling prophecy was made to Parvati when she stayed after class one day. She wanted to ask Trelawney about her tarot card reading from her final exam. Professor stopped in the middle of her explanation, and her voice took on a deep, hollow, and haunting tone. Her eyes were vacant, and she was staring at nothing. It will happen tonight. The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless, abandoned by his followers. His servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and set out to rejoin his master. The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever he was. Tonight, before midnight. The servant will set out to rejoin his master. Parvati got so scared that she ran from the room, immediately got on the mirror and called Gary. Trelawney just made a prediction. If I understand it correctly, then Pettigrew is going to find Voldemort soon, and they are going to bring him back, she said loudly when Gary's face showed in the mirror. Shite, Gary swore and sent a mental message to his brother, who got on his mirror to his dad. Gary then turned back to his mirror and saw the worry on his friend's face. Don't worry too much, Parvati. You know the adults are still on the lookout in Hogsmeade. I'll have the uncles and mum and dad keep a closer watch on the village. Maybe they can stop him. He tried to calm his hysterical friend. Why don't you come to the great hall where you can be around friends? Lavender will want to hear what Trelawney said. Just so worried, the distraught girl said as she practically ran down the halls, thankful that there were lots of students roaming around. I know, but the mutineers are here for you, Gary said calmly. Try not to run with your mirror. How about you mentally talk to Padma? She can help you over this shock. You're right, I'll put this away. I just thought you should know, Parvati said, slowing down. I know, and I thank you for that. I just don't want you to hurt yourself, Gary said sedately. Okay, done. And the mirror went blank. Harry, what did the parents say? Mostly things like you're never leaving the house again, and stuff of that nature, came the blunt reply. Gary groaned. Summer was not going to be fun. HP, and I made up the toy and jewelry stores' names. There aren't any in Hogsmeade, which is kind of silly, what with kids of every age in the castle. I have only written one action scene before, so I hope this one doesn't disappoint. I thought about splitting this up, but decided to just give you a long chapter instead. Chapter 44, The Dream. Thanks to my betas, Darrell and Alex 33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. And Peter is going to be ook because he was in Azkaban for 3 years, making him a little crazy. Disclaimer. I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HP, a short narrative. Gary was right. Summer was long. True to their word, the Potter adults didn't let the boys out of the house. It reminded them of when they were younger. The mutineers were allowed to visit, but the boys had to stay home. The Greengrass girls spent a lot of time at the Potter Manor. Susan was also there most days, with her aunt's blessings. Remus was going to continue as the Dada professor. They finally broke the curse last summer, so he was busy with class plans. Sirius was diligent in his duties as godfather and made sure the boys were entertained while under house arrest. Lily could be found doing research most days. James was at the Wisengamot making sure that laws were not passed that would give Voldemort an upper hand. It helped that Malfoy was still playing the good boy card. After several sightings of Pettigrew out of the country, the Aurors were not scheduled to be back at Hogwarts the next year, much to the protest of the Potter household. Sally said she would make sure the ghosts still patrolled the halls. The boys and Neville's birthday passed with a huge party at the Potter Manor. Everyone in the Mutineers and most of the neutral purebloods came. Many of the students were disappointed that the Potters wouldn't be doing a field trip this year. However, they still came and learned on the computers. So while the boys were confined to the manor, they still had lots of company. August 8, 1994, the house was mostly quiet. Everyone was sleeping. The only noise that could be heard was the tossing and turning of one teenage boy. He was having a nightmare. In this dream, Voldemort was laying out his plans to Wormtail. "You have done well, Wormtail," a hissing voice said from a chair by a fireplace. "When you came and found me, I was quite surprised. Now I consider you one of my most loyal followers. With my other devoted servant, our plans will not fail." "Thank you, my lord," the rat said humbly, though there was a note of pride in his voice. He was quite mad. Azkaban cracked his mind to the point that all he wanted to do was please his master. I was lucky to stumble upon Bertha Jorkins. Yet the information we got before her death will make our plans much easier. Do not be humble, Wormtail, the Dark Lord said. We must be diligent. I will ask many things of you this year. For you, my lord, I will do anything, the skinny, balding man said. Gone was the prison uniform. In its place was true wizarding robes. His master insisted on proper attire. Where is Nagini? I must feed soon, the small figure asked, moving restless in the large chair. She is hunting, my lord. I will milk her when she returns, Wormtail said, moving towards his master. Allow me to move you closer to the fireplace. Yes, a little closer, I think, was the quiet reply. Our plans are moving well, master. Soon Gary Potter will be in your grasp. Should we do something for the World Cup? The balding madman asked as he moved the chair. The small form within settled more comfortably now that it was warmer. I think not, the figure said. There will be too much security. They will be checking everyone there. No, we will proceed as planned. Gary Potter will be ours by the end of the next school year, and I will rise again. My faithful servant at Hogwarts will make sure of that. There was amusement in that voice now. Of course, my lord. A large snake slithered into the room and communicated with the being in the chair. Nagini has news, Wormtail. She tells of a muggle in the hall. Invite him in, the Dark Lord said softly. Peter swiftly moved to the door and threw it open. He grabbed the old man listening there and drew him into the room. Did you hear everything, muggle? Voldemort asked nonchalantly. What's that you're calling me? The old man replied, grasping his walking stick as though he could use it to fight his way out. You are a muggle, a non-wizard, was the being's response. Of course, I'm not a wizard. I heard enough to get the Barbies here. Killed someone already, plans to do someone else in. You are in trouble, the old man said, shaking his walking stick. My wife. You have no wife, Frank Bryce, former gardener of the Riddles. Accused of their death, were you not? Such a shame I could not claim that honor. I know all about you, and you are just an old man that lives here alone and shunned by the town folk. No one will listen to you, Voldemort hissed, still facing the fire. And you're a coward. Face me like a man, Frank bellowed to the back of the chair. You heard the man, Wormtail. Turn me around so that this muggle can face death, the figure said with a dry chuckle. Wormtail went across the room, grabbed hold of the chair and turned it around. Frank, seeing what was in the chair, screamed in fear at the hideous figure. A green light flashed and the man fell dead. A haunting laughter filled the air. Many miles away, Harry Potter woke screaming as well. Soon enough, the whole family piled into his room, wands at the ready, looking for danger. When they saw he was alone, they went to calm him. "Sweetie, what happened?" Lily said, running her hands through her child's hair. "Voldemort," Harry gasped out. Sweat was still pouring down his face, his body shaking at seeing someone die and hearing the madman's plans. "What about him?" James asked, sitting next to Harry on the bed. "He and Wormtail are planning something to do with Gary. They said something about a faithful follower at Hogwarts and plans for the end of the school year. They murdered someone named Bertha Jorkins. They said they got information out of her, and then they killed her." Harry was still shaking on his bed, his mum's arms wrapped around him and his dad patting his back. Gary was sitting next to his dad and was now just as shocked as Harry was. "I know Bertha from the ministry. She went on vacation about 2 weeks ago. She's late coming back, but everyone just thought it was her usual flighty self. Are you sure she's dead?" James asked softly, not wanting Harry to think he thought he was lying, yet not wanting to believe it was really starting again. "If my dream is true, then yeah. They killed a muggle too, some bloke named Frank Bryce. He was the gardener for the riddles. Dad, I think that means that Voldemort is in the country," Harry said, pulling himself together. "Shite," Gary said, ignoring his mum's reprimand about language. "This sucks." He flopped back on the bed. "Yeah, it does," Harry agreed, much calmer now. "We need to start making plans. That lunatic will stop at nothing to get Gary." We'll call everyone together in a few days," Lily said, patting Harry's leg. "You know, this means you can't go to the World Cup." Protests from all three men started immediately. "No, I'm not taking the chance," she shouted over the top of them. "But Mum, Voldemort said they weren't going to do anything for the cup. Wormtail asked him about it, and he said the security would be too tight." "Please, Mum, this was supposed to be the only time me and Gary got out of the house," Harry said with big doleful eyes. "Yeah, Mum, we've been cooped up for months. Don't take this away," Gary pleaded. "Lily, there are going to be thousands of witches and wizards there. The boys will stay with me and the guys the whole time. Besides, you can change your mind and join us," James said, trying to make his wife see reason. "I'll think about it," was all she offered. The three males groaned, but at least it wasn't a no. Since it was early in the morning, the Potters decided to stay up. They had an early breakfast and talked about mundane things. Everyone was on edge. This was big, and if Voldemort was in the country, then they were all in danger. The biggest problem was they couldn't take it to the ministry because it was a dream. James had tried to take Trelawney's second prophecy to the minister, but Fudge brushed him off. James was worried. He knew what was being planned for Hogwarts this year. He also knew that Bertha was an organizer for the event. If there was even the smallest chance that Voldemort had an agent at the school, then the boys could somehow get caught up in it. They were too young, but thoughts were running through his head about plans to prevent it. "Harry," Lily said, bringing the men's attention to her. "How does your scar feel?" "Itchy," Harry replied, rubbing said scar. It didn't feel any different, but it was scratchy. "That's good. I was worried that the Horcrux would make it hurt." "We're going to find a way to get that out of you," his mum said, determined. "We're really close, Lilyflower," James said, giving his wife a one-armed hug from his place next to her. I know, I'm just so worried," she said, leaning into the hug. They finished their breakfast and went to the game room to watch the telly until it was late enough to call the other families. That night, they talked to Sally. James and Lily were on one couch, and Sally and the boys were on another. "Sally," Lily began, "we need to tell the others about Harry and Gary." "Yes, we can't make plans with everyone if they don't know all the facts," James added. "You still can't tell them about me, but I absolve you from the vow about the boys," Sally said, her arms crossed, as if this was something she was loath to give up. She understood their worries, but if one hint got out about Harry's scar, it could be disastrous. "I don't see why you're apprehensive." "They've all taken a vow," Lily said, cocking her head to the side. "There are always ways around vows, but you trust them, so if you must, let them know," Sally said, still wary. "We'll be careful," James said with a placated voice. It was 2 days later that they could get everyone together. Adults and children filled the largest dining room. Chatter was heard about what could be important now. James stood and everyone quieted. "We have some really bad news," he said, a grave look on his face. "Harry had a dream a few days ago. We believe it was real. Voldemort is back in the country. He is still weak at this time, but if Harry's dream is correct, he plans on kidnapping Gary and using him to regain his body." Harry stood up and relayed his dream in a resigned voice. Gasps of fear and shouts of denial sounded around the table. They had known it was going to happen. Because of the prophecy, they just hoped it wouldn't be so soon. Suddenly, a voice spoke above the crowd. "Minute, why is Harry having dreams about you-know-who?" Eric Davis asked. "We wanted to tell you, but we were under a vow," Lily said gently, making a what-could-we-do motion with her hands. "Harry is the boy who lived. He is the person we are trying to remove the Horcrux from. We think that is why he is having these dreams," James said. His face was regretful, and he slumped in his chair and waited for the outcry. The twins tense at his side. There were whispers of conversation, and soon a chuckle was heard. "We already figured that out actually," Waynesar said. "We just wanted to make sure." "What? How did you know?" James asked, flabbergasted. "Well, the parcel tongue was a big giveaway," Maya said with a small smirk. "Then the worry you showed when you want to find the spell." He shrugged his shoulder as if it was obvious. "I would have thought you understood that we are all in this together," Daphne piped up from her mother's side. She got up and took Harry's hand and gave it a squeeze. Susan followed suit, only with Gary. "You mean you kids knew too?" Lily asked in just as much shock at her husband. There were still worried faces seen, but no one seemed surprised about Harry being the boy hero. "Did you really think we didn't talk to each other?" Dora Godfrey asked, with a lifting of her eyebrows. "We gathered many times to discuss things that we were worried about. When you told us you were under a vow, we decided to meet without you so you wouldn't break it," Zeno said, looking around the table for confirmation. Nods were seen, and the Potters relaxed. "So now what?" Sirius asked. "We do what we always do, search for answers and protect the children," Right Corner said, disregarding the protest from the teens that they didn't need protection and they weren't children. "I think a new crystal is in order," came the dreamy voice of Luna Lovegood. "What do you have in mind, Moonbeam?" her father asked when he noted her vacant expression. "The public needs to have confidence in itself, so a morale-boosting crystal might be what they need. Judging from the earlier protest, some of us could use it as well," she said, looking at the worried faces. "That's a wonderful idea. You kids work on that while we continue to search for the spell," Lily said, full of hope for her son. "Let's lighten up for a bit," Sirius said, never one to let things stay serious for long. "How many of you have found your animal?" 5 hands rose from the kids and 3 from the adults. Lots of disappointed faces were seen. They had all hoped to be Animagi. "So that's Harry, Gary, Ellie, Michael, and Mandy for the kids. Not surprising at all, really. Ren, Keaton, and Wayne for the adults. That is a bit of a shock. Usually if the parent can, so can the child," Sirius said, confused. "Unless the child is Muggle-born, of course," he said, looking Ellie and her parents. "Junior might still be able to, he just has a hard time meditating," Waynesar defended his son, patting said teen on the back. "Oh, okay, well, I guess we'll see later," Sirius said with a shrug. "So, Gary, what are you?" Susan asked. She had been curious since he told her he was something small. All faces turned to the boy in question. "I'm a Snidget," Gary said proudly. Jaws fell open. But, "That's a magical creature," Lily said, gobsmacked. James took a minute and then looked proud. "I knew you were powerful," he said, getting up and hugging his youngest son. "What about you, Harry?" Daphne asked, concerned about the blank look on his face. "I am a Grim, not a dog like Padfoot, but a real Grim," he said seriously. He had been shocked to discover this. Sally wasn't surprised, though. Well, that's great," James sputtered. It was still a magical creature, but one with a dark history. His boy never seemed to catch a break. Sirius turned quickly to Ellie. "What about you, my dear?" he asked the shy Hufflepuff. "I am a cat," she said softly. "Michael, Keaton." Keaton nodded to Michael and let him answer. "Well, I'm a raccoon and Dad is an elk," he said. "Mandy, Ren?" Sirius asked, turning to the Brocklehurst women. "I'm a screech owl," Mandy said, happy she was a bird. "And I'm a tiger," her mother chimed in. "So that leaves Wayne," Remus said, turning to the last animagus. "I am a hummingbird," the man replied. "Not as good as a Snidget, but I'll still be able to get into tight places." He nodded to Gary, who was still beaming proudly. "That might come in handy in the future," Lily said soberly, thinking about war. "Right," Sirius said, clapping his hands together, drawing the attention to himself. "Now all you need is the potion. Remus and I can whip some up tomorrow." Remus nodded, and the two bent together to make plans. "Rest of you don't feel left out like Wayne Jr. You might just not have found yours yet," James offered with a smile, remembering that the 4 marauders took different times to get their animals. Pettigrew, of course, was the last. Most of the teens perked up at that, though the parents weren't concerned. This was mostly for the kids anyway. The kids went to the game room, and the parents remained in the dining room. "I have one more piece of information," James said, standing and holding up his hands. "Whether you tell your kids or not is up to you, but I made a promise not to tell any student. For some Merlin-forsaken reason, the Triwizarding Tournament is being held at Hogwarts this year." The parents expressed their excitement until James called for silence again. "The reason we're," he pointed to himself and Lily, "worried about this is because of Harry's dream. There is a good chance someone will enter Gary's name. We know from the dream that Voldemort will have an agent inside Hogwarts. Now we have the maps, so hopefully we'll catch him before that can happen, but the maps aren't foolproof. You all remember how hard it was to find Pettigrew." Affirmatives were given, and they waited for James to continue. "I would like it if you told the kids, just in case Gary's name does appear. If that happens, he will need his friends at his side. I can't tell him, but his friends can." "I think we can do that," Natalie Greengrass offered. "Who better to tell than the girlfriends?" "Do you know where Riddle is?" Amelia spoke up for the first time. She had been going over plans in her head about beefing up the auras. "We think he is in his Muggle family's home, but we don't know where that is. They killed the family gardener, a Frank Bryce, but Harry doesn't know what they did with the body," James explained. "I'll look into it," Amelia said, determined. She needed to look into Bertha's disappearance as well. The meeting went on for another hour until they exhausted many ideas. Everyone gathered their young and went home, most to research that spell. If Harry was getting dreams from Voldemort, it couldn't be good. Sirius and Remus had the 8 people come to the manor and handed out the potion the next day. Soon enough animals and birds were roaming or flying in the yard. The rest of the mutineers attempted to meditate harder after seeing the fun. When the Potters weren't doing research, the men, including the uncles, were badgering Lily about the Quidditch World Cup. After 2 days of constant nagging, she finally conceded that they could go for the game only. No camping and no after-game parties. To the game and home, that was it. It was more than they thought they would get out of her, so they were happy to comply. The boys were disappointed that the party was cancelled, but in this house, Lily's word was law. HPHPHPN. I've hit a snag, so updates may be longer in the wait. Due to few reviews, I am not sure where to go from here. I have an outline, but now it seems superficial, too many open plot holes. So I have to rework it. So for those reviewers that asked about 4th year, I can't answer your questions at this time. Thanks for your patience. Chapter 45, The Quidditch World Cup. And thanks to my betas, Daryl Deem and Alex 33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. And I adapted most of the game from the book. I can't write sports to save my life. Also, I know Crouch Jr. Didn't show up until after the WWC, but hey, my story, my timeline. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HPHPHP, August 21, 1994, the Potter twins were excited. Tomorrow they would finally get out of the house and go to the Quidditch World Cup. Their dad had gotten a booth that held 25 people, so only the most sports-driven would be attending with them. Daphne and Astoria gave up their seats to Spencer and his dad. The mutineers decided, after the big meeting, that they would be more diligent in guarding Hogwarts this year. None of them wanted either Gary's or Harry's name to come out of whatever was used to pick the champions. They had taken the fact that Harry was the boy who lived with as much decorum as the parents had. In other words, they already suspected. Lily was still looking up spells, but now she was turning to the internet for exorcisms to see if they could be combined with wizarding spells. She was actually very hopeful that she had found one and wanted to go over it with her research team while the boys were at the cup. Harry went to sleep that night and once again was drawn into a dream. The house was the same, dusty and dark. He was in the same room as before, and there were 3 people this time. "Master," Wormtail said tentatively as he milked Nagini, "I think I have found a slight flaw in our plans." "You dare," the small homunculus hissed. "Forgive me, Master. It's not your planning that has a flaw. It's a tool the blood traitors may have that might lead your agent to being caught," the rat hurriedly explained. "And what tool might this be, Wormtail?" Voldemort asked snidely. A map of Hogwarts. We made it our 4th year. It shows the names of all who are in the castle, Wormtail said as he blended the venom with a potion. Very good, Wormtail. I am pleased you brought this up to me before we executed our plans. Tell me what this map does, the being purred from his place in the chair. As I said, my lord, it shows all who are in Hogwarts, be they Polyjuiced or Animagus. There are very few ways to fool the map. I believe it's one of the reasons I could not get close to the boy last year. Yes, that may explain it, the baby-like creature said as it turned its head to the man kneeling at his side. My agent, we must make other plans. We know the wolf will keep his position, so you must find someone else to impersonate. If Wormtail is correct, then you will not be there the whole year. You must get into the castle and put Gary Potter's name in the cup. How you get his signature I will leave to you. Don't get caught, my loyal follower. The man, who was as skinny as the diminished Pettigrew, had a narrow face. It was all angles and bone. His hair was messy, and his nose was long, though not as long as Snape's or Dumbledore's. His tongue flickered much like a snake's. He lifted his head and looked adoringly at the Dark Lord. Your word is my command, he said with absolution. Very good. Harry woke with a curse on his lips. He was that close to finding out the name of the spy. He cast a tempest and saw it was only 4 in the morning. Since he didn't wake screaming this time, none of his family was up. He got up and went to his desk and immediately wrote his dream down. His scar itched again. He was in a bit of a quandary, should he tell his mum or not. He knew if he told her this morning she wouldn't let him go to the World Cup. He really wanted to go, but he didn't want to lie to his mum. Maybe he would give her this right when the portkey took off, or at least let her know about it. Or, hey, Sally, Harry called into the night. What's up, Harry? The cute little girl faded into the room. She was now dressed in tight jeans and a ruffled blouse. She looked like any of the other girls that were in the Mutineers. Her hair was still in pigtails, and her face was cute as button. I had another dream about Voldemort. I wrote it all down, but if I tell Mum, she won't let us go to the cup today, he said, rubbing the rest of the sleep out of his eyes. So I was wondering if you could let her know I wrote it down after we leave, he requested with big puppy dog eyes. Harry James Potter, you want to use me as a messenger? She said, hand on her hips with a glare in her eyes. Harry could see, however, it wasn't a real glare. Yeah. Fine, but only this once and only because I know you boys have been cooped up all summer, Sally said, and then giggled. Harry chuckled back. He knew she would do this for him. Thanks, Sally. You're the best, he said with a brilliant smile. Are you going back to bed? The deity asked as she sat cross-legged on the bed. Nay, the rest will be up soon, Harry answered with a shrug as he folded the parchment with the dream written on it and then addressed it to his mum. Tell me about the dream then, and tell me what the Dork Lord looks like, how he sounds. I want to know everything, she said, settling in. Well, it wasn't much, mostly that they know about the Marauders map and that they were going to wait until the night of the drawing. They still think that Gary is the boy who lived. Voldemort is a homunculus with a flat face, no nose and red eyes. He is really creepy. They're keeping him alive with a potion and snake venom. He seems pretty weak, but I won't underestimate him. His mind seems completely intact, Harry said, staring vacantly at the wall, trying to recall everything he could about the being they were discussing. That is good news and bad, Sally said, when he had looked at her, indicating he was done. I mean, his weakness is probably because of the destruction of the Horcruxes, but I wouldn't be too sure about his mind being intact. I think what you need to watch out for is craziness. Crazy people do desperate things, so you are wise not to underestimate him. She nodded with a thoughtful look. Yeah, was all Harry said, also deep in thought. They both sat thinking until they heard the rest of the family start to stir. Once Gary was up, Harry mentally told him about his dream and the letter he left for their mum. Gary agreed it was the best course of action. Most of the mutineers left early that morning, but the twins weren't allowed to go until right before noon. That would give them a few hours to buy souvenirs and chat with their friends, so they moped around the house until it was time. All right, you guys, it's time to go, James shouted from the front door. The twins, who had been eating in the dining room, shot out of their seats and ran to the door. They had to take a portkey from outside the wards. James had to get one specifically made just for them because they were arriving so late. The 3 Potter men walked to the end of the long walkway and exited the gate. James held out a rusty tin can, and the boys grabbed a hold and waited a minute until it activated. After the whirlwind ride, they landed in a greeting area. "Ah, the Potters, glad you could join us," a grumpy man said insincerely. "Thanks for waiting for us," James said politely, looking at the unkempt man in front of him. The unnamed man looked very put out to have to come and greet someone so late. "I were told to direct you to the Opkins tent. It's at the end of the campsite, row 2B, the man all but growled as he pointed in the general direction of the campsite. "Thanks again," James said with a nod of his head, and grabbed the boys and started walking. They made it to the entrance of the campsite and let the man know they were just visiting someone and would be leaving before the night was over. The attendant nodded his head and gave more direct instructions to the Hopkins tent. The site was a complete mess, with many older wizards and witches running around in colorful clothes. Many of the younger generation were wearing much more modern attire. Like the Potters, the kids and young adults were clothed in shorts and t-shirts, some with weird sayings on them, but most plain. The tents were a mix of the Gap as well. You could tell some were wizard tents from the moving patterns and the two tall annexes. Cauldrons were set up with stews and potions, and they were stirring themselves. Officials were handing out reprimands left and right. There were even some who were fined. On the other hand, there were much more conservative tents that looked non-magical. They were in muted colors with regular campfires that had grates and pots set upon them. These campfires were manned by a younger person who looked like they were nothing more than a regular camper. Many people waved at the Potters as they walked by. The men returned the waves with calls of "can't stop," "sorry," or some variation of that. They quickly walked to the Hopkins tent and soon enough saw Wayne S.R. sitting outside stirring a pot of beef stew. "Hello, James." "Boys, Junior is getting some water and will be right back. Have a seat and I'll serve you up some stew," he said, directing the men to the chairs around the fire. "No thanks, Mr. Hopkins," the twins said. "We just ate." But they did take a seat and waited for Wayne or any of the other mutineers to show. Wayne S.R. shook his head at the twins' speech. He never got used to that. He raised the ladle in a silent question to James. James sat and held out a bowl to receive some delicious-smelling stew. Mutineers, mostly boys and Susan, dropped by and greeted the two boys. Their fathers and one or two mothers also gathered around. They sat and talked for a while, and soon enough Sirius and Remus showed. "James, since we know where everything is, why don't Mooney and I take the boys to go and buy some trinkets?" Sirius asked, looking at his poor godson. Gary was looking longingly at the booths he could just see peeking from the tents. "That's a good idea, but remember, be back here in 1 hour." "The game starts at 2, James said, putting his empty bowl on the ground next to him and reaching in the large side pocket of his cargo shorts for his coin purse. He took out 10 galleons and handed it to the boys. "Buy something for yourself and your mum," he commanded in a mocking voice. "Sir, yes, sir," the boys marked back, standing and giving a jaunting salute. James just chuckled and waved them and their friends away. They with their friends bought some omnioculars, a shamrock for their mum, and magical action figures that could walk of their favorite players. Harry bought Victor Crumb and Gary bought Aidan Lynch, opposite seekers. "I can't believe you bought Lynch. That man sucks," Harry said, laughing. "I have to support my team." Gary defended himself with a glare and then smirked. "At least my team made it to the World Cup." Harry, of course, had to defend his team. Hey, they were close. It's not their fault that their seeker was out that day. He poked his brother in the chest. "You two stop it," Susan said sternly, yanking Gary's hand so he didn't retaliate. "We're here to have fun, not argue. Let's go back to the tent." "It's almost time," Sirius said, grabbing Harry's arm and dragging him away from his brother. There was little the boys argued about, but Quidditch was one thing they never agreed upon. They made it back to the tent and saw the fire was out and the chairs were put away. James and Wayne S.R. were waiting for them. "Ready to go?" James asked. "Yeah," the two disgruntled boys said. James looked to Sirius and Sirius mouthed, "Quidditch." James nodded that he understood and got between his sons. "Let's go then," he said, and led the way to the forest. The woods were dark and lanterns lit the dirt path. They could hear the sounds of thousands of people moving around them, shouts and laughter, snatches of singing. The atmosphere of feverish excitement was highly infectious. They walked through the wood for 20 minutes, talking and joking loudly, until at last they emerged on the other side, and found themselves in the shadow of a gigantic stadium. Though they could see only a fraction of the immense gold walls surrounding the field, Harry could tell that 10 cathedrals would fit comfortably inside it. The ministry has been working all year to get this up, James said almost proudly, then he sighed. They had to put up hundreds of muggle-repelling wards. This campsite has lost tons of money while they worked. Hikers were turned away by the wards. When they inexplicably wound up back at their sites, they demanded refunds. James shook his head at the casual way the magical government dismissed the plight of the business they were damaging. They made their way to the entrance and handed over their tickets. Up the stairs, the ticket collector said. The stairs into the stadium were carpeted in rich purple. They clambered upward with the rest of the crowd, which slowly filtered away through doors into the stands to their left and right. The party kept climbing, and at last they reached the top of the staircase and found themselves in a medium box, set at one of the highest points of the stadium and situated partway between the golden goal posts. About 25 purple and gilt chairs stood in 2 rows. "Everyone grab a seat," Sirius said joyfully, and ran to one of the seats in the middle of the front row. The rest of the group did as suggested, and soon enough the seats filled with mutineers mostly in the front and the taller parents in the back. 100,000 witches and wizards were taking their places in the seats, which rose in levels around the long oval field. Everything was suffused with a mysterious golden light, which seemed to come from the stadium itself. The field looked smooth as velvet from their lofty position. At either end of the field stood 3 goal hoops, 50 feet high. Right opposite them, almost at eye level, was a gigantic blackboard. Gold writing kept dashing across it, as though an invisible giant's hand was scrawling upon the blackboard and then wiping it off again. Watching it, they saw that it was flashing advertisements across the field. They all settled and chatted until they heard a booming male voice say, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup." The spectators screamed and clapped. Thousands of flags waved, adding their discordant national anthems to the racket. The huge blackboard opposite them was wiped clear of its last message, "Birdie Bart's every flavor beans a risk with every mouthful," and now showed Bulgaria, 0, Ireland, 0. The voice who Sirius said was someone named Ludo Bagman, then announced the Bulgarian mascots. "And now, without further ado, allow me to introduce the Bulgarian national team mascots." 100 beautiful women filled the stadium and started to dance. The faster they danced, the more the men seemed to go into a dazed trance. Faster and faster the women went. The boys of the booth started to edge closer and closer to the railing to get as close as they possibly could to the women dancing. Just as most of them were about to put a leg over the rail, the dancing stopped. Angry voices of many men filled the stadium. "What was that?" Harry asked, vaguely disappointed that the women stopped. Then he blushed and remembered his girlfriend. "Those, my dear son, were Velas," James smirked. He was unaffected by the women and had held tight to the men around him to keep them in their seats. He wasn't surprised that the boys were affected. They were only teenagers. Hormones will do that. Before the teens could ask what a Vela was, Ludo's voice filled the air again. "And now," roared Ludo Bagman's voice, "kindly put your wands in the air for the Irish national team mascots." Next moment, what seemed to be a great green and gold comet came zooming into the stadium. It did one circuit of the stadium and then split into 2 smaller comets, each hurtling toward the goal posts. A rainbow arced suddenly across the field, connecting the 2 balls of light. The crowd oohed and ahed as though at a fireworks display. Now the rainbow faded, and the balls of light reunited and merged. They had formed a great shimmering shamrock, which rose up into the sky and began to soar over the stands. Something like golden rain seemed to be falling from it, gold coins. Lining the field on the Irish side were leprechauns. "Don't bother collecting those. It's leprechaun gold," Wayne S.R. said, smiling. "It'll disappear soon enough," the teens groaned, but put down the gold they had gathered. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, kindly welcome the Bulgarian national Quidditch team. I give you Dimitrov." A scarlet-clad figure on a broomstick, moving so fast it was blurred, shot out onto the field from an entrance far below, to wild applause from the Bulgarian supporters. Ivanova, a second scarlet-robed player, zoomed out. "Zagraf, Levski, Volchanov, Volkov, and Crumb. Harry, Wayne Jr., and Spencer cheered along with the Bulgarians. And now please greet the Irish national Quidditch team, yelled Bagman. Presenting Connolly, Ryan, Troy, Mullet, Moran, Quigley, Ayr, and Lynch. 7 green blurs swept onto the field, the word Firebolt on each of their brooms, and you could see their names, embroidered in silver upon their backs. And here, all the way from Egypt, a referee acclaimed chairwizard of the International Association of Quidditch, Hassan Mostafa. Once the announcements were over, the teams flew to the middle of the pitch. Mostafa kicked the wooden crate he'd been carrying and released the 4 balls within. The game started with Bagman's voice going over every play. "The ear off," screamed Bagman. "And it's Mullet, Troy, Moran, Dimitrov, back to Mullet, Troy, Levski, Moran." This was one of the fastest games the mutineers had ever seen. The players were going so fast that they had a hard time keeping up with them with their omnioculars on normal, but they didn't want to miss anything by slowing them down. "Troy scores," roared Bagman, and the stadium shuddered with a roar of applause and cheers. 10-0 to Ireland. Gary, Neville, Terry, Michael, and Susan cheered with most of the parents. The crowd roared and shamrocks were waved around. And within 10 minutes, Ireland had scored twice more, bringing their lead to 30-0 and causing a thunderous tide of roars and applause from the green-clad supporters. The match became still faster, but more brutal. Volkov and Volchanov, the Bulgarian beaters, were whacking the bludgers as fiercely as possible at the Irish chasers, and were starting to prevent them from using some of their best moves. Twice they were forced to scatter, and then, finally, Ivanova managed to break through their ranks, dodge the keeper, Ryan, and score Bulgaria's first goal. "Hands over your ears," James shouted as the Velas got up to dance for the score. "Dimitrov, Levski, Dimitrov, Ivanova, oh I say," roared Bagman. 100,000 wizards gasped as the 2 seekers, Crumb and Lynch, plummeted through the center of the chasers, so fast that it looked as though they had just jumped from airplanes without parachutes. Harry followed their descent through his omnioculars, squinting to see where the snitch was, but at the very last second, Victor Crumb pulled out of the dive and spiraled off. Lynch, however, hit the ground with a dull thud that could be heard throughout the stadium. A huge groan rose from the Irish seats. "It's time out," yelled Bagman's voice, as trained mediwizards hurry onto the field to examine Aidan Lynch. "Yes," Harry said, pumping his hand in the air. "A perfect Ronsky feint. Take that," he said to his brother, who was complaining with the rest of the Irish supporters. "Do I need to separate you boys?" James asked sternly. "You just might have to." "Hey, Spencer and Terry change seats with me," Harry said as he got up from his seat. He knew his limits. The 2 boys complied, and the group discussed the game so far, until the Irish seeker could play again. Lynch was back on the field, and after 15 more fast and furious minutes, Ireland had pulled ahead by 10 more goals. They were now leading by 130 points to 10, and the game was starting to get dirtier. As Mullet shot toward the goal posts yet again, clutching the quaffle tightly under her arm, the Bulgarian keeper, Zagraf, flew out to meet her. Whatever happened was over so quickly Harry didn't catch it, but a scream of rage from the Irish crowd, and Mostafa's long, shrill whistle blast, told him it had been a foul. And Mostafa takes the Bulgarian keeper to task for carving excessive use of elbows, Bagman informed the roaring spectators. And yes, it's a penalty to Ireland. The leprechauns, who had risen angrily into the air like a swarm of glittering hornets when Mullet had been fouled, now darted together to form the words, "Ha, ha, ha." The Vila on the other side of the field leapt to their feet, tossed their hair angrily, and started to dance again. All the men in the Potter party stuffed their fingers into their ears. Susan, who hadn't bothered, was soon tugging on Gary's arm. He turned to look at her, and she pulled his fingers impatiently out of his ears. "Look at the referee," she said, giggling. He looked down at the field. Hassan Mostafa had landed right in front of the dancing Vila and was acting very oddly indeed. He was flexing his muscles and smoothing his mustache excitedly. "Now, we can't have that," said Ludo Bagman, though he sounded highly amused. Somebody slapped the referee. A mediwizard came tearing across the field, his fingers stuffed into his own ears, and kicked Mostafa hard in the shins. Mostafa seemed to come to himself. Gary, watching through the omnioculars again, saw that he looked exceptionally embarrassed and had started shouting at the Vila, who had stopped dancing and were looking mutinous. And unless I'm much mistaken, Mostafa is actually attempting to send off the Bulgarian team mascots, said Bagman's voice. Now there's something we haven't seen before. Oh, this could turn nasty. It did. The Bulgarian beaters, Volkov and Volchanov, landed on either side of Mostafa and began arguing furiously with him, gesticulating toward the leprechauns, who had now gleefully formed the words he. Mostafa was not impressed by the Bulgarians' arguments, however. He was jabbing his finger into the air, clearly telling them to get flying again, and when they refused, he gave 2 short blasts on his whistle. 2 penalties for Ireland, shouted Bagman, and the Bulgarian crowd howled with anger. And Volkov and Volchanov had better get back on those brooms. Yes, there they go, and Troy takes the quaffle. The game got downright nasty from there. Fouls were called almost every minute. The Velas and the Leprechauns started fighting, and the ministry had to break them up. Harry groaned when Crumb got smashed in the face with a bludger. "Look at Lynch," Gary yelled. For the Irish seeker had suddenly gone into a dive, and Gary was quite sure that this was no Ransky feint. This was the real thing. "He's seen the snitch," Spencer shouted. "He's seen it. Look at him go." Half the crowd seemed to have realized what was happening. The Irish supporters rose in another great wave of green, screaming their seeker on, but Crumb was on his tail. How he could see where he was going, Harry had no idea. There were flecks of blood flying through the air behind him, but he was drawing level with Lynch now as the pair of them hurtled toward the ground again. "They're going to crash," shrieked Susan. "They're not," roared Terry. "Lynch is," yelled Harry. And he was right for the second time. Lynch hit the ground with tremendous force and was immediately stampeded by a horde of angry Vila. "He's got it. Crumb's got it. It's all over," shouted Harry. Crumb, his red robes shining with blood from his nose, was rising gently into the air, his fist held high, a glint of gold in his hand. The scoreboard was flashing Bulgaria, 160 Ireland, 170 across the crowd, who didn't seem to have realized what had happened. Then slowly, as though a great jumbo jet were revving up, the rumbling from the Ireland supporters grew louder and louder and erupted into screams of delight. "Ireland wins," Bagman shouted, who, like the Irish, seemed to be taken aback by the sudden end of the match. "Crumb gets the snitch, but Ireland wins, good Lord. I don't think any of us were expecting that." Everyone in the booth except Harry, Wayne Jr., Spencer, and a few of the parents cheered. "Why do you think he caught the snitch, Harry?" Spencer asked. "They were never going to win. He just wanted to end the game," Harry answered with a shrug. He could understand it, but he didn't have to like it. "Let's wait until the crowd lets up, then we have to go," James said. They had made a promise to Lily after all. "No complaints," he said firmly at the puppy dog eyes that were coming into play. The twins sighed and nodded their heads. So as they waited, they said their goodbyes, and when the crowds had thinned, they went to the portkey site and went home. All in all, it was a great game, so they couldn't really complain, until they got home to an angry Lily.